As preppers, we typically spend a lot of time and money preparing for emergencies, but here's one thing that I think we often miss, and that is when things go sideways, our ability to think clearly, to stay calm, and to make good decisions depends almost exclusively on how well we slept the night before. Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Kylene. And as preppers, we are all about prepping. And a lot of times we remember the basics. We remember our food and our water and our communication. But sometimes we miss the most obvious thing, and that is sleep. And today we want to welcome our guest, Keith Chandler, who has just done an amazing job of creating some things that will help us both every day and an emergency to make sure that we get the sleep that we need so we can think clearly, make good decisions, and feel good. So Keith, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about your project.
My name's Keith Chandler. I calculated it last night, and I think I've been working in emergency preparedness for about 59 years. I think I was 9, 10, 11, right in there, sitting in my grandparents' basement. They were building a new house, living in the temporary basement. And they said, when the next depression comes, you need to know how to do these kind of things, because they lived through, as a young couple, through the Great Depression with 3 little kids. And so I've been working on emergency preparedness ever since.
What fabulous grandparents.
Yeah.
Grandkids, listen. Remember that, you guys. They listen. They hear what you're saying.
Absolutely, they do. And fortunately for some of us, we had good mentors who got us started in good directions.
So, Keith, tell us about your project.
Years ago, I worked with Jim Phillips. He hired me as a consultant. And I remember the day I figured out his technology worked. He'd given me a set of these ugly, terrible clothing, and I told him I wouldn't use it. But I was stuck in a snowdrift, and I remember that aha moment when my wife and kids are inside the car. I've driven off the road, it's stuck in a snowdrift, and it took me about an hour to dig my way out. And when I got to the end of that, I was warm and dry instead of cold and miserable. And I thought, this guy knows what he's talking about. And from that time on, this is the only technology I've been interested in working with.
And Jim was a pioneer. I mean, I love going back and seeing some of his old stuff and the polar plunge in his foam clothing, and how he dried out and warmed up so fast. It's fascinated me, and so I'm fascinated that this is continuing, even though Jim's gone now for a little more than 2 years.
And that's what's interesting, is he's been my mentor, and he got me started on this journey. And he had his areas of preparedness that he focused on, 9 areas. And a year or 2 before he died, we were discussing things, and I said, I think you're missing one of the key ingredients. And he said, no, this is pretty well resolved. And I said, but every one of the things you prepare for is affected by sleep. And if you lose as little as 3 to 5 hours of sleep, you've compromised every other area. It doesn't matter whether it's education or stuff or water, any number of things change because you've compromised that 30% of your brain that shuts down when you don't have proper sleep.
And during a crisis, I mean, more than likely, we are going to have stressors and things that will affect our sleep. But we can control some of that, and we can hopefully learn to control it better. But there are some other things that we can do, and that's what we're hoping you will share with us today, is some of the things we can do to make sure that we get that sleep.
It is critical. It's the foundation that all of our other emergency preparedness stuff builds on top of.
And it all comes back to this green thing that is incredibly valuable. This is Kiloflex. Talk to
That's
me about it
Kiloflex.
and why it's different from any other foam.
The background of it, Jim, over the years, found out that he could find different foams that worked and weren't a sponge. Most polyurethane open cell foam is a sponge. And he did so much testing trying to figure out which ones he could use. And it worked out to about 1% of the foams out there he could use for his processes. When he passed away a couple of years ago, I lost access to all of the data that he and I had been putting together. And it forced me to go back to ground zero. I was trying to figure out the details that we already had worked out. But what I stumbled into was several of the foams that he had been using actually weren't even related in their chemistry. And so when I got dealing with the chemists and the engineers, I found out that each one of these companies he had purchased foam from had gone about developing the foam in a different way because they weren't working on Jim's problem. They were just developing foams for other people. And Jim was doing all the work to figure out what worked. So when I finally sat down with these chemists and engineers, there was a woman and her eyes lit up and she says, "I know what you're trying to do." And I said, "Great, that makes one of us." Because I had no idea. I just knew that these different foams worked, but they weren't the same. I'm not a chemist. I have no engineering background or chemistry background. So the company I was working with took all of these parameters, figured out what it was Jim was actually looking for, and he never did know what it was he was looking for. He just knew when they worked and when they didn't. And so a year and a half ago, we developed Kiloflex. And at the time we developed it, the company gave me exclusive rights to it because they said, "Why would anybody want this? It doesn't do any of the things we've normally been doing." And so they signed an agreement. I have an exclusive access to this, and they can't disclose what the formulas are. And so here I'm sitting with what Jim would have given his eye teeth for, because now we know why it works and how it works, and it's actually manufactured exactly to our specifications. So we're able to get the same performance with less thickness, better performance in handling the moisture, and it's perfect.
Talk to us a little bit about the moisture aspect of this, because that's part of what makes it so
That's
good for
a
emergency
huge
preparedness.
part of it, right?
So talk to me about that.
That is the foundation of it. Most people don't understand that when something gets wet, it transfers the heat and cold 25 times faster than dry air does. So if you're in a synthetic or a down sleeping bag and it gets wet, everyone knows they don't work anymore. And that's the reason. It's the moisture management. When you sweat inside something and it holds the moisture, you've compromised its ability to insulate. And so what we've developed here is the Kiloflex. Moisture will not adhere to the Kiloflex. And it's not a coating we put on it. It's built into the chemistry, so moisture will not adhere to it. Moisture always wants to go from hot to cold. So you're the heat source, and it's always trying to escape to the cold. So every time you have moisture or moisture vapor, it's trying to move through it. And since it can't stick to the Kiloflex, it goes out as vapor and self-dries. And that's the magic of bedding, whether it's sleeping bags or a comforter for your bed. Both work under the same principles because we don't talk about it. Everyone perspires somewhere between a pint and a quart per night while you're asleep. That's why when you were in Scouts, the first night or two, the first night you went to bed, everything was great. You woke up in the morning, you were a little bit cold. You went to bed the next night, you were a little bit cold and woke up a lot cold. By the third day, you went to bed cold and you woke up cold. That was summer camp for me. I always knew that after 3 days, I was going to be cold. And I never knew why. Now I know why. The moisture builds up in there and it's no longer insulating for you. And that becomes exceptionally critical if we go into a grid down situation in your home. Most people don't realize, let's see, for 2 decades, I worked restoring old homes, historic homes, 100-year-old, 200-year-old and older homes. And they had fireplaces in the bedroom. And back when I was restoring them, I thought those fireplaces were to heat the bedroom when you went to bed at night. So everybody wants to be warm when you go to bed, but it never really made sense because you're wrapped up in all this bedding. Why are you worried about a fireplace at that point? Well, they didn't have the fireplace for when they went to bed. It was so when they got up in the morning, they could hang their bedding out in the bedroom and dry the bedding. But we're so smart in the 21st century, we don't need that anymore because we have central heating in our homes and it dries out the bedding in your bedroom right now. But if the grid goes down, you've lost that ability to go to bed each night with dry bedding.
That, to me, the first time I heard that was very enlightening and actually kind of scary because, as you know, if we have a grid down in winter and you're having all that moisture build up in your bedding, and most people wouldn't even think to go hang it up and try and get it dried out, but the moisture does make all the difference, and it will be a negative difference if we don't understand how to manage it.
Correct. No one would dream of pouring a gallon of water on your bedding and expect to go to bed warm and wake up warm. But after a week of sleeping with the same bedding with no heat in the home, it's exactly the same as you poured a gallon of water on your bed and then you went to bed.
Let's talk a little bit about real world experiences, because when we've kind of been on a journey here with Keith, and it's been really fun. When we first started sleeping under this, suddenly it felt so much better and sleep was better. And it has something to do with being thermal neutral. Talk to us about thermal neutral.
About 5 years ago, when I was starting to build sleeping bags, the people would come back to me the day after they'd used it and say, "That's the best night's sleep I've ever had." And we'd laugh about it. But after you hear that 20 or 30 or 40 times, you start thinking, there must be something to this. So at that point, I started studying sleep to figure out, why is it the best night's sleep? And what I came to the conclusion after listening to Walker and Winters, they're all doctors that have been deeply involved in testing for sleep. And what they tell us is that when you go to sleep, you have actually 5 levels of sleep. And the one that's really critical, they all are critical, but a REM sleep is extremely critical because during REM sleep, your body detoxes and basically you're paralyzed. All the systems in your body shut down so that they can detox. And that's why the only thing people notice is rapid eye movement. That's what REM stands for. So you're paralyzed. If you weren't, you would act out your dreams and things like that. But all of your systems are detoxing. So when you bundle up to get warm, you're actually warm-blooded, so your body compensates for all the blankets you have on. But then when it starts detoxing, it shuts down those regulative systems. And if you're all bundled up, your heat, your core temperature starts going up. And it gets warmer and warmer and warmer until your brain wakes you up and says, okay, you're overheated, it's critical, you have to adjust the blankets. So you wake up and you're warm-blooded again now, and you kick the blankets off and you're fine and you go back to sleep. And then when you go into REM the next time, your body temperature starts to drop because all the blankets are kicked off. And so when it gets low enough, your brain wakes you up and you go, wow, I'm really cold. And you get really bundled up. So the next cycle starts, and that goes on and on all night long. And your brain keeps waking you up without finishing the detox. So if you can create a system, a bedding or blanket that keeps you thermally neutral, then when you go into REM, you get to go through the entire sleep cycle without being awakened. So you get a full detox. So you might get 5 or 6 full REM cycles in a single night, and then you wake up in the morning. So now I have a question for you. When you wake up in the morning after sleeping under the Kiloflex, do you feel like you've had a better night's sleep than you did before you started using it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to be honest, I was a little, little curious and, a lot curious and
very
a little
skeptical.
skeptical about, okay, will this really work? But it has been, and we've been through now 2 different iterations of this. And yeah, it's been quite a difference.
It's funny because as we've been on this little journey with you, the first thing that we started was with the cocoons, and you kept encouraging us to sleep in them. And I would do it for a little bit, but I always wanted my snuggle buddy, and I wasn't willing not to have my snuggle buddy there, right? But our grandkids loved the cocoons. Whenever they came over, they either wanted to be on a cot in the cocoon or on the couch in a cocoon. And always and I'd be kind of lazy. Oh, you guys, don't you just want a blanket? No, we want the cocoon. And so it's been kind of fun to see that progression because they love that. But now that I can have the Kiloflex comforter and still be able to have my snuggle buddy, it's like the best of all worlds.
That's
right?
it.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's so special.
That really sums up the entire project, because my goal has been for decades now to help people get emergency prepared. I taught classes in Spring City. Jim and I set up the weekly classes. So I had about 100 different classes that I could teach. So I could teach for 2 years and never have the same subject twice. So we covered a lot of territory. All of those come back to sleep. Every class we taught, you could set as one of the foundation principles is if it's a skill, your brain has to work to do it. If your brain's not working and you pick up your chainsaw that you may use twice every 5 years or something like that, and you're trying to use a chainsaw and you've lost 30% of your hand-eye coordination, that all can happen with just one night's sleep, one night's bad sleep. You've lost 30% of your cognitive ability, your physical abilities. So you've lost 30% of your storage. So what happens if you make a bad decision and you lose 30% of your food, or you lose that chainsaw because you injured yourself, someone else, or the chainsaw itself? These are all critical things in an emergency.
And one of the things that I like about the quilt that we have on our bed now, our Kiloflex comforter, is that it's there all the time. And it's also there when the power goes out. I don't have to make any change. I don't have to dig it out of anywhere. It's just there. And I really like that. I think it's one way of being prepared in your daily lifestyle, as well as if something happens.
I still don't understand how the magic works. That still baffles me.
Says the engineer.
Yeah. That's why it's especially baffling, because this brain wants to understand it all, and maybe someday I will. But after having slept with that comforter through this past winter and needing only that comforter, usually we've got 2 or 3 other blankets or something, I find it just fascinating.
It is interesting that you mentioned having other blankets. You can have the comforter. You can put your normal bedspread back on the bed. You can sleep under the Kiloflex comforter with a quilt on top of it. I have one friend who tried it with 5 quilts on top of the comforter. And he said, I can't understand it. It's the same temperature underneath that Kiloflex, whether I have no blankets on top or 5 quilts on top. It's the same temperature. How does that work? And I said, that's just the magic.
So we've got the comforter that's available now, and we will leave a link. I think our audience gets a 15% discount if they just go through the link. So make sure you look for that link in the description of the video. And then you guys also have a 3rd generation of the cocoon, which
yes.
Jonathan and I were looking at that, and the old cocoons opened in the center, but this one opens on the side. And I think I really like that.
It opens on the side just like a normal sleeping bag. Now, I didn't buy my first really expensive down sleeping bag until I had developed the first cocoons. And that's because I had to buy one so I could test it out and show apples for apples on how they function. What I found was when I started using the expensive down sleeping bag is you have to keep your head out. And so my head was always cold. And if you pulled it in close, now everything around your face gets wet from the humidity. And I could feel the coldness coming in from around my face. And pretty soon the entire top of the sleeping bag is wet. Now it's rated for 0 degrees, but at 17, I was too cold to keep sleeping out there in that expensive sleeping bag. So the magic of ours is it moves all that moisture out. So you can go down inside our sleeping bag and breathe warm air inside, breathe it back into your lungs and stay warm. And all the moisture works its way out. It never compromises the system. So you'll see some flaps on the new sleeping bag. It looks mostly like a regular sleeping bag. But what you find out is those 2 flaps, you can tuck one inside the other one and seal it off. Jim taught me that the first thing that fails in a sleeping bag is the zipper. It always fails. Sooner or later in the cold, it's going to fail. So our sleeping bags don't have any zipper. So you crawl inside our new one and fold it closed, and you have an air source above you right here. It allows fresh air to come in and go out. And I won't give you all the technology, but I can't explain why and how that works. But you get fresh air in that's warmed, and you get to maintain all of your warm air inside. So with the basic insulative values that you would need when you first went to bed, now it's going to stay warm and dry, not just for the full night, but for the next week or the next month. Whether it's the bedding or the sleeping bags, they're going to be dry every night you sleep in them. And if somebody gets your bag or your blanket wet, the easiest way to dry it out is to crawl inside the wet sleeping bag or underneath the wet blanket. And by morning, it's going to be dry. And within minutes, you're going to be warm and dry inside there. And within an hour or 2, the bag will be warm and dry completely.
And we should mention too that these are totally machine washable.
They are.
Because I have stuck ours in the washing machine and stuck it out there. We don't have to wash it very often because it's in the duvet.
Yeah, duvet cover.
The duvet cover.
Yep. So yes, they're completely machine washable. You can put them in the dryer. And there's a little learning curve there. I burned up one dryer learning this. You put it in the dryer, and because the water always wants to go from hot to cold, if you put it in the dryer heats up from the outside in. So it pushes all the moisture to the middle and insulates it so that it won't evaporate. So you can put it in the dryer, but you can leave it in there for 2 days, turning it on and back on and back on, and the center's still going to be wet because it does a great job of insulating and pushing the moisture to the middle. So you put it through one dryer cycle, that's okay. It's not going to hurt anything. It's not like you can't dry it. It's just you can't get it dry in a dryer. So you pull it out, hang it up, and within a couple of hours, it's gonna dry because the water wants to fall through the Kiloflex and it can't adhere to it. So within an hour, it's all wet down at the bottom. And then to speed up the process, you turn it over upside down. Now the water has to fall through again. And each time it moves from one cell to the next, a little bit of it evaporates.
Yeah, I just hung it outside, and it didn't take very long to dry it, so yeah, I didn't worry about a lot.
And if it's still wet, put it on your bed. Crawl inside. You'll be shocked because within minutes, you'll crawl in and go, oh, this is terrible. Oh, well, yeah, it was terrible. It takes about 10 seconds and you go, oh, okay, I can live with this. And then within a few minutes, it'll be dry.
This is so cool. It's just so cool. You've done great. Jim would be so happy to know that so many people's lives can be blessed. Okay, so let's talk about the products because you've got something exciting coming up. We have the comforter that is available on your website. And then there's the cocoon, and it's the 3rd generation. So it's even better than the ones that we have. Mm-hmm. But then you have a Kickstarter for something called the Game Changer.
Inside the Game Changer is a patented next-generation synthetic we call Kiloflex. Conventional insulation products work by trying to keep heat and moisture inside. Kiloflex creates a layer of comfortable air next to your body while releasing unneeded heat and moisture into the atmosphere. Kiloflex is so effective at regulating the flow of air around your body, it allows you to avoid the nightmare of being woken up because you're either too cold or too hot. And if you get into the Game Changer while you're wet, you will get dry while you sleep. All this makes the Game Changer the first sleep system ever to work with the laws of thermodynamics instead of against them. The comfort zone of the Game Changer extends from 85 degrees Fahrenheit down to 30 degrees. 55 degrees of thermal neutral comfort. And if the temperature drops lower than that, we designed the Game Changer to be versatile, so just stick it inside another sleeping bag, and depending on the bag, the range will quickly extend down to 15 degrees and beyond. The Game Changer has already proven itself in test after test, including...
Hi, I'm Daniel.
With Daniel on a 7-day, 100-mile whitewater rafting trip.
And I was comfortable all night long. Never too hot, never too cold. It was just nice.
Never too hot, never too cold, comfortable in 30-degree weather. At Thermal Neutral, we are proud to introduce the Game Changer as our first product, but this is only the beginning. We are thrilled to invite the Kickstarter community to join with us as we take this first step with the Game Changer and the power of Kiloflex to bring comfortable sleep to you and the world.
If you guys watched my emergency evacuation kit video, these are what I have that are tucked up. I keep them right up with all of our emergency evacuation stuff because if I'm going, they're going with me.
That's right.
So talk to us about the Game Changer.
Okay, so the Game Changer was originally developed for the Cocoon 1, the first series. And we wanted something that we could put as a liner inside the sleeping system and improve the warmth. So the original cocoons were good down to between 10 and 20 degrees. And by adding a liner to it, we could get that down to below 0. So that's why it was developed. And then as we started to get them out to people, the liners, people started using them all on their own as a standalone blanket. And it was okay. So they're telling me they're sleeping out in their cot or in their hammock, and they're good down to 30 degrees all by themselves. Okay. Well, once we got the new Kiloflex a year and a half ago, and they would sleep out in these liners in the rain, and there's no waterproofing on them. But because of the way the magic happens in pushing the water out, it hits the outside and rolls off. So they're sleeping in the Game Changers without any waterproofing, and they work fine down to 30 degrees. And so we're all elated with that, and we figured we have a product that'll sell here. And somebody said, can I use it in my own sleeping bag? I don't know. I'd never thought of that before. So we started testing them in the other sleeping bags. One of the first things I did was put it inside my 0 degree down sleeping bag. And sure enough, it extended the range way down past 0 degrees, which was great because for me, it's a 17-degree bag. The magic to it, though, was when I'm sleeping in a 60 or 70-degree room, that down sleeping bag overheats at about 45 degrees. And at 45, you have to unzip it and open it up and on and off and on and off all night if you're over 45. But if you put this game changer in there, it's thermally neutral next to your body. So it's thermally neutral at 70 degrees. So there's no more off and on with that down sleeping bag. And so then I bought a $14.95 Walmart sleeping bag, the cheapest sleeping bag I could actually fit into. And it's rated for 50 degrees, which means at about 55, you start getting cold. And I tested it, and at 55, I was cold in that sleeping bag. Cold enough, there's no way I would try to sleep out in it below 50 degrees. That's just not going to happen. And so a few weeks later, the temperature dropped, and I put a game changer inside that $14.95 sleeping bag. And the temperature dropped, and I thought, well, it's just outside my door. As soon as I get cold, I'm going inside. I'm just going to call it good the moment I feel any cold. And I slept in it all night. And when I got up at 6:30 in the morning, it was 11 degrees outside, and I was warm and dry. And I'd slept all night in it. And I don't sleep once I get cold. And so I started to get out, and I felt that $15, $14.95 sleeping bag. It was soaked. It was completely wet. So that means you would have been cold in that one at 75 degrees by itself. But I was warm and dry down to 11 degrees.
That is so crazy.
That's cool.
That is so crazy. Okay,
Very
guys.
cool.
So you don't have to buy a new sleeping bag. If you buy the game changer, that's what came to mind. Was you mentioned how happy Jim would be with this, because Jim was always, his emphasis was, we've got to get it into people's hands for less money than what it's costing us to build these. And so the goal is, with our Kickstarter, we're going to market them for about $300 because that's what we have into them. But we're going to sell for everybody that supports the Kickstarter in the beginning. They can buy this liner out of the Kiloflex for $200, put it in any sleeping bag you've got. I don't care what the sleeping bag is, or if it's just a cotton sheet you have for your bed. Wrap up in it. It's going to take the temperature, even a cotton sheet, it's going to take it down into the teens. And with any sleeping bag at all or a blanket, it's going to take it down below 10.
That is just so cool.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
So for you guys, we will leave a link. So we don't know for sure when the Kickstarter is going to be. It'll be soon. But there's a link that you can sign up and be notified when the Kickstarter happens, if that's something that you would be interested in.
Well, this has been fun, Keith. Thank you for being with us. This is awesome information and important information.
And thanks for helping me sleep better every night.
Yeah, for sure. So do you have any last words for our audience?
The system works. It's well tested. I have a money back guarantee and never had to give anybody their money back. The system works that well. What's really exciting is you get to put it on your bed now, and it will improve your life right now. But when the emergency happens, you're going to function better in the emergency because you're already used to this. You already use it. And when it becomes critical, using it is just a matter of changing the location.
I think that's awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll have links in the description for you to look at these products. Thank you again for being with us, Keith. And now for the question of the day. What are your plans to make sure you get a really good night of sleep when disaster strikes? Let's drop this in the comment. Let's talk about this and have some learning discussion. And thank you for being part of the solution.